Every young girl dreams of becoming a duchess. Our heroine entered the ducal family after her engagement to Philin, who was the only heir of Duke Williot. All this happened when the girl was 14 years old. The ducal family enjoyed the enormous glory of the imperial sword, and to her great gratitude, the duke and his wife treated her like their own daughter. Although she was a representative of the poor provincial aristocrats, delicious dishes, useful little things, and also beautiful and expensive gifts were always given to the girl first. They loved her so much that even their son often grumbled about it. And at the same time, she also loved them very much. The count's wife dreamed of marrying her to her stupid son and thus making her a duchess. From the duchess, Layla learned to behave correctly as a future housewife. And Philin at this time became very interested in fencing training. For this reason, even though they were engaged, they didn't have much time to talk to each other. But it couldn't be said that the guy and the girl were on bad terms, even though they didn't have passion like lovers or intimacy like friends. Whenever there was an opportunity to talk even a little, they often had fun and joked with each other. Layla's life in this family could be called very happy. But one day, as if laughing at her happiness, trouble suddenly struck. One evening the weather was terrible. It was raining heavily and there was deafening thunder. Gusts of wind swept away everything in their path. Suddenly they reported terrible news. It was a real disaster. The carriage that the Duke and his wife were traveling fell into the abyss due to heavy rain. The guy and the girl were very excited and very worried about the fate of their parents. But at the same time, they still hoped that everything was fine with them, and that they did not die so easily. All Layla dreamed of at that moment was to see the two of them enter the doors of the house again and again, call her their beloved daughter. This is what she wanted more than anything in the world. But unfortunately, God did not hear her prayers. Philin lost his parents at a very young age and became the head of the clan. He cooled down to everything and began to leave the fencing training hall less and less often. And Layla, although she was still only in the status of his bride, was forced to take on not only the duties of a duchess, but also take care of the duke, who had turned his back on the whole world. After the death of the guy's parents, they spent 3 years without getting married or even holding their own coming-of-age ceremony. One day the young duke received an unexpected order from the emperor. Philin went to the battlefield. A whole 6 years have passed. Layla was very worried and diligently prepared for the meeting of the young duke. Everyone in the house was bustling around and making final preparations. The girl was very embarrassed and confused. This feeling of softness and luxurious outfit. All this had not happened for so long that she felt awkward. A lot has happened since Philin left for the war. It was simply luck that they managed to defeat the famine and epidemic. But now Philin is finally coming back. Of course, it's too late to say that she loves him passionately or gets excited in his presence. But nevertheless, the girl was very glad that now they should finally get married. Layla met her fiancé after a long separation, but suddenly she noticed something strange. Her fiancé returned from the war, but not alone. He held a stranger in his arms. The girl stood and did not understand what was happening. She looked at her fiancé, who had been absent for the past 6 years. After 6 years, he finally returned and had another woman in his arms. The girl couldn't believe her eyes. The stranger had sparkling golden hair and a graceful feminine figure. But most importantly, she had a rounded tummy. The maids who stood behind her immediately began to whisper to each other. They too were shocked by what they saw in front of them. They did not understand why the gentleman brought her with him and whether this was the Duke's child. The maids could not believe that he was doing this to Mrs. Layla. "Quiet, everyone!" Suddenly the maid stopped the whispering of the other maids. Then she turned to her mistress. The girl was sure that his lordship would not do such a thing. "We just misunderstand something." Layla looked at her groom, who was holding a beautiful stranger in his arms. She wasn't sure there was anything wrong with this. At the same time, she did not understand how she should behave if this woman's belly really was her fiancé's child. Her first thought was to grab her by the hair with all her hatred, as some villains do. On the other hand, despite the fact that everything was boiling inside, she could pretend that nothing had happened, as befits a noble aristocrat. There was only one main question left. Do I even have the right to something like that? After all, she is not even his wife, but just a bride. The girl remembered that she was not a duchess, but just an orphan who was accepted into this house. Then the guy got off his horse and approached Layla. He greeted her, but she just remained silent and looked at him. "Layla, I hope you haven't forgotten how to speak in these 6 years," he asked the girl mockingly. Layla immediately pulled herself together and smiled back at him. She explained that she was a little shocked, so she asked him to change her. "Hey, what exactly are you shocked by?" her boyfriend asked with a confused look. The girl looked at him and did not know what to answer him. She didn't understand, he was testing her. Or he really didn't understand the reason for her shock. She even had the hope that if he didn't understand, then perhaps this woman's child was not actually his. Then the guy helped his pregnant companion get off the horse. He was very worried that it was very tiring for her to sit on a horse all this time. Mila flirted with her and hugged her. He led the girl towards the house. At that moment, all the servants again began to lively discuss the Duke's behavior behind Layla's back. No one could understand how he could behave like this, and everyone was very upset for their mistress. Layla understood that nothing could stop chattering out loud now. It was also very unpleasant for her to look at all this. Although their engagement could be called formal, it was insulting to behave like that right in front of her eyes. Then the guy remembered something and stopped abruptly. He turned to the servants and ordered the room to be prepared, which was located at the very end of the eastern corridor on the second floor. It was a room that had plenty of sunlight and was perfect for his companion. Layla couldn't believe it. This was his mother's room. It was impossible to accommodate just anyone in this room. "Fill in, but this room belonged to the Duchess." The girl was indignant. She then explained that it could only be used by the current Duchess. The guy did not understand her indignation. He just wanted to sit the girl in an empty room. But he really didn't like the tone in which Layla spoke to him. "The rules in this house are set by the owner," he said in a serious voice and ordered the maid to show his guest off. The groom, who returned after 6 years, allocated her ladyship's room to some stranger. "Madam, are you okay?" the maid asked after the Duke left. The girl collected her thoughts and replied that everything was fine. Moreover, she understood that absolutely nothing would change if she said what was wrong. It took so long and painstakingly to dress her up to meet the man who arrived with another woman. Layla really wanted to give up everything and just go back to her own peace. But she understood perfectly well that her position did not allow this. Therefore, she ordered to prepare for dinner and prepare the necessary room for the guest. "Misa, if you notice anything strange, report to me immediately." A little later, the girl was sitting at her desk and working on documents. For the 9th year now, the seal of the ducal family had been in her office. She was looking through documents that she had not had time to read due to her meeting with Philin. People who previously viewed her acting as temporary duke negatively began to accept it as something natural over time. However, in her position, mistakes were not allowed, so she tried her best to do her job flawlessly. A strong thunderstorm was beginning outside the window. Layla needed to check everything down to the last comma, and then it could be considered that that was all for today. Suddenly, there was a strong clap of thunder. The girl was so scared that even her documents fell out of her hands. On days when there was a thunderstorm and thunder roared with flashing lightning, she still shed tears, remembering the events that happened many years ago. This could be considered a trauma that arose after the death of the ducal family. She was sure that Philin no longer even remembered this, and had completely forgotten about her suffering. A maid entered the room and said that it was time for dinner. Layla quickly left the room and followed her. The girl was not going to miss the first family dinner after such a long absence of the young duke. For her, it was a sign of family courtesy, even if it was unpleasant for her to eat while looking at his face. All the servants were running and bustling around the house. Layla immediately noticed that with the duke's return, the house became very noisy and fussy. Walking towards the dining hall, she suddenly saw a maid carrying a whole tray of food. The girl asked why there was so much food if dinner was about to start. The gentleman said he wanted to have dinner in his room. The frightened maid answered her mistress, and she added that he was tired and did not want to go down to the dining room. At this moment, the girl seriously wondered if she was part of the Felon family. She remembered how his parents said that they considered her their own daughter. But these were just thoughts, not the truth. She has been living and working in the duchy for more than 10 years, but she has always felt like a stranger here. She couldn't even demand that he at least be polite and have dinner with her. The girl saw that the servants, of course, were trying to console her, but they didn't even understand everything. Moreover, there was quite a lot of food on this tray for one duke. The girl immediately realized that the duke would be dining with his guest. Layla quickly turned and headed to her office. Suddenly, the Baron entered the office with a bunch of documents in his hands. He was in a hurry and explained that she urgently needed to sort it all out. "Baron, from now on, all ducal affairs relate directly to Philin," Layla answered in a serious tone. The Baron quickly left her cabin. He worked for the Duke's family for 30 years, but this was the first time he was so confused. The Baron was not even sure that the Duke would be able to understand the meaning of what was written in these documents. The guy was also very surprised when the Baron brought him documents that required urgent study. He knew that Layla was always involved in such matters. Even before, when he was in place, she was always doing this. Then the young Duke grinned. He realized that Layla had sent the Baron to him on purpose because of her whims. "I was bored. How long will you continue talking?" Suddenly, the Duke's guest named Cecilia intervened in the conversation. The guy immediately ordered the Baron to take the documents back to Layla. The Baron was completely confused and tried to explain that this was very urgent, but the guy still kicked him out the door. "Is Layla your fiancé's name? Looks like you're pretty close," the girl asked the guy. She was surprised that the bride called him by name and spoke to him informally. After all, she is just a countess and he is a duke. Layla may be a bride, but in noble circles they may look at you askance, Cecilia whispered to the Duke. And she added that if he allowed her to treat him like that, then others would also begin to look down on him. A little later, the Baron, looking unhappy, again came to Layla with all the documents. But this time the girl took pity on him and took the documents. She realized that her fiancé refused to even look at them. The girl understood that for 10 years he had been dodging this work, and was unlikely to start doing it with joy now. But he is still a duke. This means that she cannot work for him all her life. Layla signed the documents, and at that moment she thought that it was necessary to discuss this issue with him. Maybe we can talk about the woman at the same time. Suddenly an idea appeared in her head. The girl gave the Baron all the documents she had corrected and they said goodbye. It had been a very hard day, and now it was finally possible to rest. Layla sat down on her bed but could not bring herself to go to bed. Outside the window, thunder rumbled and lightning flashed every now and then. She tried to reassure herself that there was nothing to be afraid of and everything was fine. But with every minute she became more and more afraid. Tears even appeared in her eyes from resentment and fear. She recalled how good it was when at such moments the maid Misa was always next to her. This girl always knew how to calm her down. Misa at that moment watched the Duke being polite to his guest. Sissel was also afraid of thunder. Therefore, the guy gently hugged her and reassured her. The maid drew attention to herself and asked the Duke for permission to leave. He replied displeasedly that she was free and continued kissing Cicely. But before the maid had time to leave the room, the girl stopped her. She explained to the guy that they hadn't been riding horses for very long, so her legs and back were very sore. Cecilia wanted the girl to give her a massage. Misa replied that there was a maid in the house who could handle this better, and she had better go to her mistress. But the Duke looked at her angrily and ordered her to immediately massage the girl's back. The next morning there was a knock on Layla's door and suddenly it was her fiancé Philin. He explained that he had something very urgent. The guy gave the girl a letter and said that it contained a requirement to attend the coronation ceremony of the new emperor, which would take place in a month. Layla knew that the journey to the capital took about 4 days. In the remaining time, she needed to decide on shells. It was worth calling the designer first to decide on the dress, and then on the shoes and jewelry. The girl began to ask the Duke how long he plans to stay in the capital, and she added that before the trip it will be necessary to make preparations for the coming rainy season. And it was also necessary to prepare the carriage and gifts in advance. "Layla, from now on speak to me formally." Suddenly the guy said seriously and did not listen to her to the end. He explained to the surprised bride that from that day on they would often go out into high society, and her informal speech may have a bad effect on other people's opinion of him. "You don't want to disgrace me in front of the entire high society, do you?" Layla didn't even know what to answer him. He never told her anything like that. Is it really that woman who gave him the idea? She suddenly became suspicious, but she replied that she would do everything as he wished. From now on, at public events, she will address him as your lordship. In return and in front of others, call me not Layla, but Lady Tabisa, observing all the formalities. She suddenly added at the end. The guy frowned, thought for a moment, but agreed with her. Then the guy, sitting imposingly on the sofa, said that he also wanted to take Cicely with him to show her the capital. He also asked Layla to help her choose the right clothes. "She is our guest, and you are the hostess, so do your job." The girl laughed in response. It was very funny to her that he considered her the mistress here. Even though they are supposed to get married, he dares her to force her to take care of this woman who is pregnant by him. "So you'll do all this time just because of this?" the guy asked in surprise. He explained that Cecilia became pregnant by mistake because of one night, and he could not abandon the child. Then he admitted that after the birth of the child he would send this woman to another place. "You understand, Layla? I will only marry you." After his words, the girl thought about it. His words meant that the child this woman would give birth to would be accepted into the family. Her father, Count Tabisa, did the same, and thus she became Lady Tabisa. She suddenly pushed his hands away and said in a serious tone, "I understood what you want to tell me. So remember that too. If you really look at me as your future wife, then don't ask me to take care of this woman." A few days later, all the servants in the house did not stop discussing the latest events. Everyone noticed that tension sparked between Mr. and Mrs., and of course everyone understood that the woman the Duke brought with him was to blame. Layla constantly heard all these conversations behind her. Everyone was especially worried about what would happen if this woman gave birth to a son for the Duke. In this case, this woman could become a real duchess. Everyone immediately fell silent when they saw Layla nearby. But she didn't hold a grudge against them and always asked them not to come up with awkward excuses. Moreover, she understood that it was impossible to deny what everyone was talking about. Layla didn't get engaged to him because she wanted his love. All she wanted was the surname Duchess Williot to escape her own origins. Of course, it was very unpleasant in her soul when her fiancé was having fun with another woman nearby. But all she had to do was not meet her face to face. Unfortunately, this also was not destined to come true. One day they finally met face to face. The pregnant woman smiled sweetly and tried to be very friendly. "Hello, my name is Cecilia Heliod," she introduced herself. Layla looked at her with a cold gaze, and at that moment she remembered where she heard the name of this girl. Then she remembered. Mullis State. This is the surname of the royal family that was conquered by the empire several years ago. If so, that meant she was a princess. At the same time, Layla understood that it didn't matter anymore, because this country no longer existed. Layla also introduced herself in response and immediately turned around with the intention of leaving. "Lady Tabesa." Layla was dumbfounded and stopped when she heard her call her lady. Generally speaking, members of the royal family whose country was destroyed automatically acquired the status of commoners. Therefore, she had to call her mistress, but not lady. "Please address the lady appropriately." The maid immediately intervened, who also did not like the woman's familiarity. Misa didn't understand why they had to treat the princess of a fallen kingdom like an aristocrat. Layla tried to calm her maid. She immediately apologized for the maid and asked her to forgive her. "I ask you to be generous, Miss Heliod." It was no coincidence that Layla used the title Miss. This was done in order to emphasize the current status of Cecilia. Why did Layla apologize again and say that she had a lot to do? That's why she needed to leave urgently. The girl was sitting in her office and was very tired from all this empty talk. In addition, her maid suddenly informed her that a letter had recently arrived from Countess Tabisa, Layla's stepmother. At the mention of this name, the girl immediately recalled all her childhood traumas. Her childhood was terrible because of this woman. Layla tried not to think about the bad and read the letter. In the letter, the Countess asked how she was doing and warned that tomorrow she was going to visit her at the Duke's residence. The girl understood that although she did not want to meet with her, she still had no visible reasons for refusal. She told her maid about the Countess's arrival and warned her that there was no need to make any special preparations, so there was no need to worry about it. Suddenly, an alarmed girl from the servants ran into Layla's office and said that the woman had suddenly lost consciousness. The doctor is already examining her. The Duke is also at her bedside. The next moment, the young Duke burst in. "Layla, what did you say to Sicily?" The guy was furious. Although the girl did not understand what he was talking about, he did not believe her, and he wanted to know why that woman fainted immediately after talking with Layla. The Duke explained that she had not yet come to her senses, but the doctor assured him that this was all due to psychological shock. "The maid said that you met her today." Layla explained that they were simply greeting each other, and she admitted that she simply called her by name. The Duke immediately grabbed her tightly and ordered her to listen to him carefully. "If something happens to my unborn child, I will not leave it like that." Layla listened in horror to all his threats, trembling with excitement. She didn't even have the strength to respond with anything of her own. Then the guy left and the maids immediately rushed to their mistress, who was frozen in horror. Layla sat in her thoughts on the floor in the place where Philin had left her. Now she understood everything. It was safe to say that her fiancé's feelings for this woman were much deeper than they seemed. Her position as Duchess could be taken away from her at any moment. Layla understood this perfectly now. The truth was that this engagement might not end in marriage, but in separation. A little later, Layla was informed that Countess Tabisa had arrived. The girl slammed the book she was reading and gathered her courage and went to meet her. She greeted her stepmother with a smile and hospitality, but the Countess immediately asked her not to keep her in the hallway. "Let's go to the living room. We have a lot to talk about." They sat down at the tea table and Layla began to top up the tea. At this time, my stepmother looked at me and said that she looked very good for a girl who was about to lose her place. Layla sharply replied that she was not in the mood for a long conversation and asked to speak to the point. She didn't want to drag out this conversation at all, which was very unpleasant for her. "You're still the same rude person," her stepmother answered and reminded her that she was still Layla Tabesa, although she behaved like a real duchess. Then she added that she had heard interesting rumors that Williot had brought into the house a mistress, a princess of a conquered state. Layla immediately guessed that someone in this house was reporting to her stepmother about everything that was happening here. Well, the Countess told her that it didn't matter now. What mattered was that this woman got pregnant faster than she did. The Countess reminded the girl of her advice to marry Philin as soon as possible after the death of his parents. But she didn't listen to her, and that's why she got such problems. Then the Countess took out a small glass container and explained that this was a medicine that would help her get pregnant. "And this will help get rid of the child," she said, placing another similar container next to it. This was too much. Layla did not intend to continue this meaningless conversation any further and intended to leave here as soon as possible. "Come to your senses, Layla. If this woman gives birth to a child, what will happen to you?" The Countess explained to the girl that in this case her engagement would be terminated, and if she was lucky enough to become a duchess, then only in the role of a puppet. "Well," Layla sharply pushed her hand away and said that she would pretend that she had not heard all this and asked her to go back. The old Countess did not argue with her. Moreover, she had already said everything she wanted. "Leave it to yourself. You will have to make a decision if you want to protect your place," she said finally, pointing to small containers with medicines. A little later, Layla sat in her room and thought about this conversation. Although she was disgusted with Cecilia, this did not mean that she wanted to kill her child, who was innocent of anything. Layla blamed only one person for this whole situation. Philin was the only one to blame for having foolishly conceived this child. But at the same time, Layla could not help but understand that if that woman gave birth to this child, then her future would become very certain. Suddenly, the maid entered the room and reported to her mistress that the tailor had arrived from the studio. Layla immediately perked up. She was glad to have the opportunity to take a little break from her difficult thoughts and decided to deal with the immediate problem first. The day after tomorrow, it was already necessary to go to the capital. So there was not much time left and it was necessary to hurry with all the preparations. Then Layla asked to take the tailor to the living room and invite the young duke there. But to her surprise, Misa replied that they were already there. And besides this, her fiancé invited Miss Cicely with him to teach her how to greet guests. Layla was dumbfounded by what she heard from her maid. She couldn't believe that her fiancé was trying to teach this woman the rules of reception. Greeting guests is one of the duties of the mistress of the estate. A mistress should not do this. The girl once again realized that she was still not the mistress of the estate, but was only pretending to be one with Philin's permission. "Madam, are you okay?" the maid asked with concern, seeing that the girl was very upset. She even offered to go and kick this woman out of there right away. Well, Layla collected her thoughts a minute later and replied that she shouldn't do this and let everything be as the Duke wished. Moreover, she understood that if she tried to drive this woman out, she would only expose herself in a bad light. But she also could not help but go. The girl with a serious look entered the living room where the tailor and the young Duke were already talking. She greeted everyone and asked the tailor where all the dresses she had ordered were. The tailor was a little confused and began to explain that Miss Cecilia was looking through them now. "Hello, Lady Tabisa." Suddenly Layla heard the voice of this woman. She turned and saw Cicely. Out of surprise, Layla couldn't say a word at first, but then she asked, "What are you wearing?" Layla still clearly remembered the moment when the late Duchess gave her this dress. "Although you are not married yet, and it's too early to give such a gift, I would really like to see you in it." The Countess explained that this was a dress for pregnant women, and she tried very hard when choosing him for Layla. "My dear Layla, I can't wait to see you in this dress." The girl could no longer restrain all her emotions that had accumulated in her over all these days. "I asked why you are wearing the dress that the late Duchess gave me." The young Duke immediately stood up for the pregnant girl. He explained that it was he who asked her to wear this dress, and he didn't understand why she was reacting so strongly because of some piece of fabric. Moreover, she doesn't need these clothes. So he thought it would be better to give it to someone who really needed it, instead of leaving it to gather dust. But Layla was not at all satisfied with all these explanations. She didn't understand what it meant to gather dust. She kept it in the very back of her wardrobe because she was afraid it might get damaged. "How did you even find it in my secret room?" she asked the Duke, and immediately understood everything. The Duke would never have entered there, which meant that Cecilia had invaded her personal space. She had no other choice. She needed to receive guests, but there was no suitable outfit. The guy admitted when he realized that his bride had already guessed everything. And then he explained that this wouldn't have happened if she had ordered the right clothes for Cicely in advance. Layla couldn't believe that he was now trying to shift all the blame onto her. At that moment, the pregnant girl, whose evil eye had tears rolling down, began to ask for forgiveness and beg to stop this quarrel. "If I had clothes, this wouldn't have happened. I am really sorry." The Duke immediately rushed to calm her down and explain that she had nothing to apologize for, because she had done nothing wrong. He then ordered hot, soothing tea and a towel to be brought immediately. Layla looked at all the Duke's fuss around the crying pregnant girl and thought, he brought a pregnant foreigner into the house, but she now understood very well that she should be careful, because this woman could threaten her position. But in fact, at the moment it was Layla who felt like a stranger. "Let's go, Misa," she told her maid, and they left the living room. Rumors spread among the maids at the speed of light. Throughout the backyards of the estate, the servants were discussing what had happened in the living room. But at the same time, everyone supported their mistress and understood why she snapped and was rude to the pregnant girl. Layla heard all these conversations, but in fact she was already prepared for this when she raised her voice in the presence of strangers. Now she was more worried that she would have to go to the capital with this woman. Misa was very surprised by the behavior of her mistress. Layla didn't like all this, but she didn't do anything and just walked around inspecting the territory. "If it were me, I would shift everything to the Duke." But in fact, Layla had already held a meeting a week ago, at which everyone unanimously decided that it would be fair and correct to transfer all the work to the Duke. Layla told everyone at the meeting that in a week she would go to the capital and transfer affairs there to the Duke. The carriages were already standing ready for departure near the house. Near one of them stood the young Duke along with Cicely. As soon as he saw his bride, he told her that Cecilia was not feeling well, and therefore he would go with her. "As you please, I don't care." Layla answered him coldly and immediately got into her carriage. In fact, she was even glad that they were not traveling to the capital for the emperor's coronation ceremony in the same carriage. But for some reason she still felt very unhappy at that moment. After some time, the carriage finally stopped. The road to the capital turned out to be very exhausting and long. So tired, Layla got out of the carriage with only one thought. She really wanted to rest. All the servants who met them immediately noticed that Layla was traveling alone. Then they saw the young Duke emerging from another planet with another woman. The maids immediately began to discuss all this. Layla quickly turned away and headed towards the house. She didn't want to listen to all this here too, especially since she was very tired after the journey. The girl entered a spacious, bright room that had been specially prepared for her. "I heard it rains very often in the capital. Could you give me a room without windows?" Suddenly she asked the surprised maid. She was very surprised at this request from the mistress, since such a room was usually used by the maids themselves. But Layla didn't mind, even if the room was very small. The maid quickly took the lady to another room, which had very small windows, and which was located at the end of the corridor. Layla immediately realized that this was exactly what she wanted, so she said she would stop here and asked her to bring her luggage. "As far as I know, this room is not intended for ladies." Suddenly she heard the voice of her fiancé, who was standing at the door with Cicely. Layla replied that she had chosen this room herself, and saw no reason why it should bother him. "Did you do this to get closer to Cicely?" Suddenly her fiancé asked the girl quite seriously. Before Layla even had time to answer him, the pregnant girl intervened. "Honey, don't be angry because of me." After that, she turned to Layla's with a question. "So I can live in the same room with Phil, right?" The girl explained that if she had to live alone in an unfamiliar place, she would be very nervous. Therefore, she will be much calmer next to him. The guy immediately answered for Layla that this was a great idea and he would be happy to stay with her. Layla was silent all this time and did not say a word. She felt that she was starting to feel dizzy and became very stuffy, so she quickly turned around and left with her maid. After some time, Layla went for a walk. Misa noticed that after this walk the lady immediately felt better, and she even began to smile, which had not happened for many days. It's just that all this time Layla was thinking about breaking off the engagement. She was worried that if she separated from Philin, she would become of no use to anyone at all. What can an ordinary countess like her do? In addition, she understood that no one was waiting for her in her home either. She's just a young aristocrat who can't even adjust the hem of her skirt. Suddenly, Layla heard some kind of scream. Turning around, she saw a guy dragging a young girl somewhere, and another little girl was in the way. Layla could not stay away. She immediately demanded that he stop immediately. But the guy advised her to mind her own business and move on. But Layla did not give in and demanded to know what was happening here. This girl borrowed money and didn't pay it back for more than 6 months. He explained why he behaved this way with her, and he continued to drag the unfortunate girl away somewhere. The little girl, with tears in her eyes, told him that her sister only borrowed 30 gold from him, and now he demands 500. Layla immediately reminded the guy that in the empire the highest lending rate should not exceed 30%. And then she warned that if he didn't stop, he would end up in a prison cell. Misa, go call the officer. When the guy heard this about the officer, he became even more furious. If you walk around alone, then it's better not to interfere in other people's affairs. He screamed and attacked Layla, taking out a huge knife from his belt. Everything happened so quickly that Layla didn't even have time to react. But at the very last moment, the asshole's knife stopped from hitting the blade of the sword. The next moment, Layla saw an unfamiliar guy standing next to her and holding a sword in his hands. You bastard! The guy with the knife screamed and rushed into a new attack. The stranger came out in front and with one deft blow knocked the asshole to the ground. He approached and warned that if the bully was going to continue in the same spirit, then he would no longer be so lenient with him. The bully quickly got up and ran away. He realized that he had messed with the wrong person. Layla watched her savior. She didn't know who this man was. He had shiny blue hair and a piercing gaze, also snow-white skin and expensive clothes. He didn't look like an ordinary person. At the same time, the girl could not remember a single aristocrat of her age whom she did not know. And you are happy and reckless, lady. The guy turned to Layla. He explained to her that if he had not intervened in time, something terrible would definitely have happened. What a bold statement, Layla answered the surprised guy. And she added that if he had not been there, she would still have been able to stand up for herself. And the next moment she quickly waved her fan, from which the tip of a knife was sticking out, and put it to his neck. Looks like I got it wrong. I apologize for my bias. The guy, who was actually amazed at what he saw, apologized, smiling. Layla replied that he did not need to apologize. She then in turn thanked him for his help and for his apology. By the way, this is the first time I've seen such a useful fan. Where can I buy this? The blue-haired stranger asked the girl. Layla replied that she made it herself. After the death of the Duke and Duchess, there was no one left who could protect her. When Phil went to war, the estate was periodically attacked by those who wanted to get it. She admitted to her boyfriend that a woman should not carry something like that with her. But then the girl explained that she had no other choice. Amazing! The guy did not hide his emotions. He was very surprised that a fragile aristocrat could make such a weapon for her protection. Incredible! Layla, when she heard that a stranger thought she was incredible and amazing, immediately remembered that her fiancé had never told her anything like that. But then the girl quickly drove these thoughts away. Layla scolded herself for comparing her fiancé with another man. She quickly turned to her maid and said that they urgently needed to go. It was necessary to call the guards and report that man. After that, she thanked the guy again and said goodbye. The stranger remained where he was. He looked after the leaving girl and thought about something, smiling. Layla walked with her maid, who all the way talked only about the handsome young master, from whom a bright light seemed to emanate. She was fed up that her mistress would also shine like that when she became a duchess. Layla thought about it after her words. More recently, she was also confident that she would become one, but now she was tormented by vague doubts about this. They eventually found the garrison and immediately headed towards it. Having gone inside, Layla turned to the officer that she would like to report the incident that she had witnessed. But the officer, without looking up, simply handed her the application to fill out and said that after that they could go. "Aren't you going to beef up security?" "I saw a man mocking a girl," Layla said indignantly, but the officer replied indifferently that he did not have enough people. Therefore, he advised her to quickly fill out the application and leave. The maid immediately began to be indignant. "At least you know who you're talking to." Well, Layla calmed her down and explained that there was no point in making a fuss here. She then added that it would be better to report the Capitol Guard's negligence directly to His Majesty. The officer heard this, immediately changed his behavior, and frantically began to make excuses and promised that he would take all necessary measures. It was already quite late when they left the garrison after filling out the application. It was necessary to return home as quickly as possible. It was very creepy to walk along the dark streets of an already unsafe capital. Suddenly, Layla noticed that someone had been constantly following them for a long time. She stopped and turned sharply to her pursuer. "Why are you following me?" Suddenly, she saw a blue-haired guy who smiled sweetly and apologized for scaring her. "I would like to ask you something." The guy explained that he was very interested in how she knew about the maximum permissible interest rate in the empire, and that this scoundrel had far exceeded it. The guy admitted that he always thought that such ladies from noble families did not study such things. Layla understood his surprise perfectly. It was quite natural because the lands were mainly ruled by men, so women did not need to study. But this was not her case. The girl replied that she was simply fascinated by all this. "What? Don't you like that a woman is interested in such things?" she asked the guy. But he answered in confusion that that was not the point at all. The stranger admitted that he was simply very surprised, because usually ladies are not interested in such things. Layla, after answering all his questions, said goodbye and moved on. "I look forward to our next meeting, Lady Layla Tabisa." Suddenly she heard it behind her. The girl turned sharply to find out how he knew her name. The street was completely empty. The guy had already disappeared somewhere. After some time, they finally got home. Layla was already lying in her bed, and her maid continued to think about the stranger. "He must have seen the design on your fan. In addition, you are quite a famous person in social circles." The next morning, Layla suddenly noticed that the Duke had arrived. His carriage stopped right in front of her window. "Apparently he came from a walk," Misa suggested. "Layla!" He greeted her friendly when he noticed her at the window. The girl reminded him that he should call her Lady Tabisa and asked him to continue to honor their agreement. Layla at that moment recalled their happy childhood. The little Duke always admitted to her that it was very interesting to talk to her. He was even a little jealous of how much she knew. Therefore, he dreamed of becoming as smart. "Are you crying?" the Duke asked, suddenly noticing tears in her eyes. The girl replied that this was nonsense. Just a speck of dust got into her eye. "By the way, Lady Tabisa, girls like chocolate cake, don't they?" The guy asked, smiling, and added that he didn't really understand this kind of thing, so he asked the store owner, who advised him to do this. Layla couldn't believe that he bought her a chocolate cake. Her hand reached out to a beautiful colored box decorated with a large bow, and suddenly she heard that Cecilia really wanted to try it, so he bought it for her. The delight on Layla's face immediately disappeared. "Wouldn't you buy it for me?" the girl asked barely audibly. The guy was very surprised and admitted that he didn't even know about her passion for sweets. Besides, if she wants, she can always buy it for herself. Cicely was delighted when the Duke brought her a chocolate cake. She enjoyed every bite of it and didn't mind eating it all. "Did Lady Tabisa get cake too?" Suddenly she asked the Duke, who was very surprised by her question and did not understand why she was asking. The girl admitted that she felt guilty for enjoying such a delicacy alone. Her kingdom has always had a tradition of sharing food. Now Lady Tabisa and my family too, so I would like to share with her. After some time, Layla's maid with a smile on her face told her mistress that the Duke had sent her a cake. "He still really cares about you." Layla was very surprised. Philin was not one to care about something like that. In addition, she remembered that she had seen this box before. The girl guessed that it was the same cake that was intended for Cicely. Now she felt as if she had begged him. "I know you don't like sweets, but try at least a piece," Misa asked her mistress, carrying a small saucer and fork. Layla, smiling, admitted that she actually wanted to try it herself, and at that very moment she opened a beautiful shiny box. But what they saw there shocked them to the core. There were only the remains of the cake. Layla couldn't believe that her fiancé had sent her a gift that was actually leftovers from Cecilia's cake. I was told that in her homeland there is a tradition of sharing leftover delicious food. The butler who brought the gift from the Duke explained. Layla, without hesitation, ordered to immediately throw it in the trash. Philin, how much longer are you going to make me unhappy? The girl asked herself a question. She was no longer sure that she meant anything to him at all. Layla didn't know what to do next. At that moment she began to wonder if Countess Tabisa felt the same way as she watched the Count courting her mother. The girl guessed that this was why she bullied her so terribly throughout her childhood. But the saddest thing about this situation was that Layla still had to take care of him, despite all the shame she felt. "Madam, would you like to sew a scarf?" Suddenly her maid asked. Misa explained that this would be his lordship's first appearance in high society. There is a tradition that during the debut, men wear a handkerchief embroidered by their family or bride. Layla really remembered this tradition. But she admitted that even if she had free time, she still wouldn't be able to sew it. Come to think of it, it had been a long time since she had had to embroider. A lot of time has passed and she has lost all her skills. Layla remembered the last time she embroidered a scarf for him before he went to war. They said that if a lover takes a handkerchief on the battlefield, he will definitely return unharmed. That's why she did it then. The girl remembered his words very well when she gave him that embroidered scarf. He reassured her and promised that he would return safe and sound. At any other time, this memory would be very pleasant for her, but not now. No matter how much she hated him, he was still her fiancé. Moreover, it was impossible to allow her to be convicted on the day of her debut. Layla understood this perfectly. "Misa, prepare everything you need for work." It was already deep night, and Lila was still sitting at her embroidery. Her maid was very surprised that the mistress had already injected herself more than 20 times during all this time. Misa thought that the lady was good in everything she took on. "Well, Layla, I honestly admitted that there are a lot of things that she can't do at all. For example, she was very bad at cooking and dancing." The maid still understood the difficulties with cooking, but the problems with dancing were completely incomprehensible to her. Layla replied that he had no sense of rhythm at all. Thanks to incredible efforts, she can dance the waltz quite naturally, but the problem is the inability to get into the rhythm. Behind all this talk, Layla finally realized that she would have to do this all night in order to give the finished scarf to the groom in time for tomorrow. As she thought, in the morning the embroidery on the swimming trunk was already completely ready, and the girl was very happy and proud of herself. Misa also praised her mistress for such perseverance and advised her to immediately give this scarf to the Duke. "You embroidered it so diligently. This will certainly impress the Duke." Layla was a little doubtful, but then decided to listen. She quickly washed her face, got ready, and went to her fiancé. Standing at his door, she still did not dare to take the next step. Suddenly his breath caught in his throat. It reminded her of the moment when she first gave him the scarf. Suddenly the door opened and the Duke came out. He was very surprised when he saw his bride right under the door. Just as she wanted to give him her gift, Cecilia ran out after him, holding an embroidered scarf in her hand. "Why did you leave without a scarf?" Layla saw in her hand a handkerchief with the Williott family coat of arms embroidered on it. The girl noticed that it was made much neater and more elegant than the one she made. Layla quickly hid her scarf behind her back, which she had been embroidering all night without closing her eyes. The pregnant girl saw Layla and was very happy. She just wanted to ask her for a small favor. Cecilia said that she heard that they don't know how to embroider, so she decided to do it herself. "This is Phil's first appearance in social circles. If he comes without a handkerchief as his bride, then this could disgrace your family. That's why I sewed it for you." Layla looked at this girl and everything was seething and boiling inside her. "Who do you even think you are?" she thought at that moment, but was silent. "Why are you looking at me like that?" the pregnant girl asked, pretending to be naive. The Duke also turned to the bride with a reproach, that she could at least thank Cecilia, who tried so hard for their sake. But instead, Layla just stands there and glares at her. "Once again I am convinced of your bad character," he said in a dissatisfied voice. Layla felt that gaze on her again, a look full of contempt. He looked at her as if he was absolutely sure that he had done nothing wrong. "It is not I who is crossing the boundaries of what is permitted here, but you, the Duke." Suddenly the girl boldly answered the surprised guy and his companion. "No matter how much this woman says that she is carrying your child, she is just a mistress. A creature that does not have the right to go into the light and is doomed to live forever in the shadows." Layla expressed all her dissatisfaction. despite the fact that the Duke did not like it very much. The girl did not understand why she should be lenient towards her mistress, who dared to violate her rights as his bride. What are you talking about? She did it from the bottom of her heart. The Duke tried to intercede for Cicely. He yelled at his fiancée and demanded that she stop immediately. His scream was heard in every corner of the house, and every person in the house understood what was happening. The Duke raised his voice from behind his mistress to his bride. This was very indecent behavior, and all the servants immediately began to discuss this. Layla calmed down a little and answered the groom that he could decide for himself whether to take this scarf to the banquet or not, but she categorically forbade anyone to say that she sewed it. Layla knew that he could not object to her, because he was embarrassed in front of Cicely. After these words, the girl turned sharply and walked away. She quickly ran out of the house and headed to the carriage. The coachman helped her sit down, but tried to explain that this was His Highness's carriage, and he definitely won't like that she drove off on it. He can use anyone else, so let's go now. The girl answered the coachman coldly and ordered him to take her to some quiet place. The carriage set off. An upset Layla sat in it and thought. She injured all her hands during the night embroidering this scarf. And for what? The girl now did not understand what she even hoped for. At that moment, she felt like a pathetic fool. Meanwhile, the Duke was trying to calm down Cicely after the scandal with Layla. He was very worried and even wanted to call a doctor. But the girl replied that his presence alone made her feel better. The Duke told her that Layla had always been like this. As soon as someone violates her boundaries, she immediately becomes ferocious. He hoped that as time passed, the situation would improve. But as it turned out, she became even tougher than she was before. I'm just a lover, so it's okay if society doesn't recognize me. The girl spoke in a pitiful tone, stroking her round belly. The only thing she was worried about was what would happen to her child. But the Duke replied that she had nothing to worry about. At birth, he necessarily carries it to the family registry. And Layla, as a stepmother, will simply be obliged to raise him. The girl thought for a while, and then, with tears in her eyes, admitted that she was very worried about Lady Tabisa's behavior today. What if she bullies my child? The Duke assured her that if this happened, he would deprive Layla of everything and force her to leave the estate. Cecilia looked into the Duke's eyes with her eyes wet with tears. She didn't show it, but she really liked his answer. This was what she wanted. At this time, somewhere outside the capital, lonely Layla was sitting under a tree and crying. She did not understand whether she could now live as before. Suddenly, someone handed her a handkerchief. She looked up and saw the same guy. "Why are you crying in a place like this?" he asked, holding his handkerchief in front of her face. Layla immediately perked up. She really didn't want anyone to see her in this state, so she smiled and replied that everything was fine. The guy sat down next to her and told her that even though it was a quiet place, the lady shouldn't be here alone. "I just wanted some privacy," the girl explained. Then the guy offered her his help if it was in his power. The girl thanked him for his support and such words. But the blue-haired stranger insisted that he said this quite seriously. These were difficult words of support. Layla felt a little awkward. She thought at that moment that she and this man began to clash quite often. The girl, sitting next to him, carefully so that he would not notice, began to examine the guy. The hilt of his sword was badly worn. This meant that he had pretty good skills. It wasn't like this sword was only meant for self-defense. She immediately remembered her fiancé. The hilt of the sword was also quite shabby. "Lady!" Suddenly the guy said and quickly put something into the girl's mouth when she turned to him. The guy explained that it was just strawberry candy. Eating these sweets always helped him feel a little better, and so he really hoped that it would work for her too. Then the guy noticed an unusual box that was lying near the girl. Layla saw that he paid attention to the box and wanted to remove it very quickly, but in the end it turned out that the box opened, and a white handkerchief with embroidery fell out onto the ground. The guy managed to take it first. "Judging by the coat of arms, it's intended for your fiancé?" he asked the girl. Layla sheepishly replied that this was not true at all. It's just unnecessary trash, but she still asked for it to be returned to her. "Why do you want to throw away a clean handkerchief?" the stranger asked her in surprise. "Because there is no need for it anymore," she thought, but didn't answer him. The guy immediately noticed how her facial expression changed after his question. After an awkward silence, he asked to give the handkerchief to him instead of throwing it away. "Don't talk nonsense. Why does the young master need such an ugly thing?" Layla didn't understand, still trying to bring him back. But the guy replied that the scarf was not ugly at all. Moreover, it was clear that she put all her efforts into him, and in general, the embroidery on it is very beautiful. Then the guy took her hand, which was reaching for the scarf, and kissed it tenderly. Don't think that I'm one of these idiots who are easily deceived by a beautiful shell and who cannot recognize the true value. Layla was a little embarrassed and he took advantage of this, immediately hiding the handkerchief in his pocket. Layla decided not to pay attention to it. Still, she wanted to throw it away as unnecessary. It would have been better to give the scarf to someone who really needed it. I would like to take this opportunity to ask you something. Suddenly, the stranger said. He explained that this concerns taxes. He was having some difficulties with this and would have been very glad to have her help. Layla advised him to contact the tax inspector, but the guy replied that he had already tried, but the problem had not been solved. Layla found it strange that he was consulting with an ordinary lady about an issue that even a civil servant could not solve. But still she agreed to help. The guy described his problem and Layla, using all her knowledge, told everything she thought about it. "You helped me a lot." "Thank you," a satisfied guy said to the girl after her long answer to all his questions. The girl replied that she was glad to talk. In fact, at this moment, she thought that she had not had such a pleasant conversation for a very long time. It was a great conversation. Suddenly the guy told her as if reading her thoughts. The girl was pleasantly surprised that he had the same opinion. Suddenly she remembered that she still didn't know his name. "If you don't mind, may I know your name?" she asked the guy. "Do you want to know my name?" he asked in response with a mysterious voice, and immediately, to Layla's surprise, invited her to guess. He guessed her name. Now let her try to guess his name. Layla was a little confused. She didn't understand why she had to guess. That was pretty arrogant on his part. But the girl started playing this game anyway. She listed one clan after clan, but this was not the same. As a result, she listed all the people from noble houses of her age. If he was one of them, she would definitely find out. "Give me at least a hint," she asked the guy, not wanting to give up. But the guy again mysteriously answered that the mystery lay in his hair. The girl looked carefully at his blue hair, shining in the sun. She still didn't understand what the clue was. "And you are not very knowledgeable as far as I can see," the guy said to her, smiling, looking at her uncomprehending, dissatisfied face. In the end, he decided to do things differently. The guy suggested that she find out his name before the banquet. At first, the girl was surprised that he would also be there. Then she realized that this was natural for an aristocrat whose position was higher than the marquis. After all, nobles lower in status than the baron cannot participate in the celebration of the emperor's ascension to the throne. Suddenly, she remembered the banquet and the scandal that happened the day before, and she again plunged into her dark thoughts. "Don't you like events like this?" the guy asked her when he noticed changes in her mood at the mention of the banquet. The girl decided that since he had already noticed it, it was stupid for her to deny it. Therefore, she honestly admitted to him that it was so. "May I ask why?" the guy continued to ask. Layla definitely didn't want to answer this question, although in her thoughts she perfectly understood why. She knew that everyone would start whispering if they saw her there with Philin. Although he will not take Cicely's scarf with him, since she warned him, he will not wear her scarf either. Besides, she had no intention of giving it to him. The girl knew very well that the Duke, who appeared on his debut without a scarf embroidered by his bride, was a shame. And this would be a great topic for those who like to gossip. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't even notice how she began to nervously bite her lips. Suddenly she came to her senses and saw that the guy was touching her lips. "Looks like you have a bad habit." But the girl was very scared from surprise and moved away from him. The guy explained that he was very afraid that she would hurt her lips like that, but in the end he scared her. He was very embarrassed and asked for forgiveness. Layla told him that she was afraid not because of this. She was busy thinking about something completely different. The girl admitted that this was her first appearance in public, and she was very afraid of making a lot of mistakes. The guy reassured her, saying that because of the war, many nobles would appear in public for the first time at this banquet. So she shouldn't worry. The guy laughed in response and replied that it was so. But then he admitted that as he is now, he is only with those who are interesting to him. Otherwise, he won't even look at them. Layla felt a very strange feeling. It would be quite burdensome if he said he was interested in her as a woman. But after listening to him, she doesn't feel like just a lady at all. She really liked that this guy sees outside of a person named Layla. It's time to say goodbye. But the guy friend touched her hand with his hand and said that he wanted to ask her something else. Something about taxes again. The girl asked with interest, but he unexpectedly replied that it was connected with her. Have you ever thought about becoming a civil servant? He asked Layla absolutely seriously. At first, the girl did not take his question seriously. She reminded him that a woman could not hold a management position, but the guy replied that as far as he knows, such a law does not exist. And again he asked her quite seriously, slightly paraphrasing his question. If such a chance presents itself, will you take advantage of it? Layla looked at him carefully and now realized that he was asking absolutely seriously. Undoubtedly, she answered without hesitation. Where in the capital, at a desk that was simply littered with work documents, a guy was sitting and studying them. This entire office was littered with documents. Suddenly the guy heard someone enter. He jumped up joyfully and shouted, "Look who came! They transferred all the work to me and disappeared. Isn't it so, Your Majesty Emperor Kalyan Deshipal?" The emperor entered the study or smiled back. "I actually really appreciate you," he confessed to his assistant, who did not feel any better from his words. The guy begged the emperor to find him an assistant. Otherwise, he would spend the rest of his life behind these papers. But the emperor replied that he trusted only him. He had no one else to rely on. At this moment, the emperor's assistant was seriously considering betraying him and spending the rest of his life in prison. However, sooner or later you will really have to find a new assistant. Suddenly the emperor said to the guy. The assistant was delighted. He jumped up and immediately suggested sending out a request for candidates with letters of recommendation to the nobles. "Not necessary, we will conduct an exam." Suddenly the emperor answered him. In the empire, it is true that there is an exam for civil servants, but it was almost never practiced. This position is usually appointed either by distinguished graduates of the academy or by letters of recommendation. But the emperor's assistant understood perfectly well that if he decided to take on this matter, he would be able to do something that no one had done before. The assistant's entire mood immediately disappeared, especially after he learned from the emperor that the exam would be in a month. "Time is short, but I understand you. Do we include only management among the disciplines?" he asked the emperor. "Something else. Include the phrase 'women are welcome too' and make sure it is clearly visible." The emperor asked for an assistant, smiling mysteriously. The day has come to celebrate the emperor's ascension to the throne. Early in the morning, preparations began in the duke's house. Layla was very worried. The banquet lasts 2 days, but she will only participate today. Tomorrow is exclusively for men. She understood that today she really needed to try, but she still wasn't sure if she was up to the task. After the incident with the scarf, she and her fiancé were in a state of cold war. Previously, they had at least exchanged a couple of phrases, but now they did not say a word to each other. She did not know whether she should worry that nothing would change in the ballroom. Layla was almost ready. She wore a chic dress specially prepared for the banquet. Her maid was at a loss for words with delight. The girl understood that the maids always showered her with compliments, but this was the first time that she herself really liked the dress. She immediately decided that when she returned to the estate, she would definitely reward the tailor. The last preparations were completed and Layla was ready. The Duke was already waiting for her in the living room, and therefore it was worth hurrying to be on time for the banquet. Layla hurriedly opened the door of her room and quickly went out. The next moment she felt that the irreparable had happened. Her entire beautiful silver dress was completely covered in red wine. "Oh, I'm sorry," Cecilia said with an empty glass in her hands. She explained that she was in a hurry to get to her room and accidentally bumped into the door. "Sorry, I'm very sorry." Layla didn't know whether it was done intentionally or not, but to everyone, what happened looked like an absurd accident. She understood that if she got angry, she would be the only one who would look strange. The girl immediately began asking her maids how many spare dresses were in the mansion. She understood that this was a banquet on the occasion of the coronation of the emperor. Now the most important thing is to change clothes and show up on time for the holiday. The maid replied that this was the only silver dress that they took to the capital. Layla thought seriously. Makeup was chosen directly to match the outfit, and there was no time at all to change jewelry. In addition, they have matching outfits, so she couldn't wear anything else. Layla quickly ordered to bring any similar dress, not necessarily the same color, as well as a jewelry box and shoes. The maids immediately stopped following their mistress's instructions. "At this rate we might be late, so tell the Duke to go first." Layla told the butler, and not paying attention to Cicely, turned around sharply and headed to her room. A little later, the Emperor was informed that Duke Williot had arrived. But looking out the window, his assistant suddenly noticed and said that the Duke most likely arrived alone. One without a bride? The Emperor jumped up from his seat and went to the window to see for himself. Stand at the window, he saw that the Duke had indeed arrived alone. The guy was very thoughtful. "Is there something wrong?" "Delay the start of the banquet," he said to his assistant. Layla Tabisa. In secular circles, this name is known to everyone, even those who have never seen her. People gave Lady Layla notoriety. They whispered that the daughter of a provincial aristocrat was lucky enough to have a relationship with the ducal family. And, for some reason unknown to anyone, this family loved her like their own daughter. At first there were rumors that she was not a child of the Duke of Williot. And then it even got to the point that they began to consider her his mistress. After the ducal couple suddenly died, and young Philin became the head of the family, movements began, the goal of which was to seize the ducal lands. The people involved acted secretly, but Duke Williot did not show it, remaining steadfast. The Emperor read this report carefully. He was very surprised and thought it was very suspicious. The Emperor considered Philin not a very smart person. Vice versa. This guy's stupidity made him feel sorry for him. Therefore, the Emperor thought that the dukedom would fall as soon as the guy inherited. The young Emperor did not understand how the Duke managed to stop all this. He even suspected that he had a very talented assistant. Therefore, it was necessary to find out everything as best as possible. The information received left the Emperor in amazement. The one who was so unstable in the Williot family was not the Duke or the assistant behind him. She was a young girl who had recently become an adult. The Emperor forgot about all this, because after what happened, he immediately went to war. Now he was thinking about Layla and their recent meeting. He was very sorry that such a talented person was next to a fool like Philin. "Your Majesty, it's time to go to the banquet hall," suddenly the assistant said to the Emperor, who was immersed in his thoughts. But when the guy found out that Duke Williot was still alone and his bride had not yet arrived, he replied that he needed to postpone the start of the event a little more. The Emperor began to worry a little. She definitely couldn't miss such an important day. Did something happen on the road? At this time, Layla was already heading to the coronation in the carriage. The girl was very upset. Although she managed to change clothes quite quickly, she still realized that she was very late. To be late for a meeting with the Emperor is a huge disrespect. Quickly climbing the stairs, Layla thought that she wouldn't even have anything to say in her excuse. And at the same time, she understood that in order for this not to harm the Williot family, she must figure it out herself. But to her great surprise, the doors that were supposed to be closed at the beginning of the holiday were still open. This seemed very strange to her. Hasn't the holiday started yet? Entering the huge imperial hall, where there were already quite a few guests, Layla looked around. And to my joy, I realized that everyone was still patiently waiting for the Emperor to appear. And this means that she still managed to make it on time. "What are you happy about?" She heard the question behind her. The girl quickly turned around and saw her fiancé. He was very unhappy that he had to wait for her for a very long time. Philin began to be indignant that he had to experience a lot of unpleasant moments because of her lateness. Layla, of course, could say that it was all the fault of Cecilia, who knocked over a glass of wine on her festive dress. But the girl did not want to bother herself with explanations, and therefore simply asked for forgiveness. And at the same moment she noticed a handkerchief in her groom's pocket. At first, Layla thought that he had come here with the scarf that Cecilia had sewn for him. But then she took a closer look and noticed that the scarf was too worn and not new at all. Philin immediately understood everything from her confused look. Pointing to the scarf, the guy said that his mother had sewn it a long time ago. He explained that if he had come without a scarf, bad rumors would have spread not only about him, but also about them. Then the guy offered his hand to the bride and they proceeded to the rest of the guests. The groom told the girl that His Majesty was delayed due to certain circumstances, and this makes her lateness not so noticeable. Layla did not know what the circumstances were, but thanks to this she was not late and felt great relief. And at that moment the musicians began to play, announcing the arrival of the Emperor for the holiday. All the guests immediately fell silent and turned their gaze to him. The Emperor came out to the guests and Layla froze in complete amazement. She couldn't believe her eyes. The Emperors were the same stranger who saved her. The girl looked at the Emperor and could not believe it. But on the other hand, she immediately thought that the distinctive features of the imperial family, which is patronized by the blue dragon, are bright blue hair and eyes. Now she immediately understood why he had called it a hint then. Even though his debut was delayed due to the protracted war, how could I remember this only now? Layla was angry with herself. She felt very stupid now, an aristocrat who did not recognize the current emperor of her country. She felt terribly embarrassed. Lady Tabisa. Suddenly her fiancé called her and asked what she was thinking about so much, but the girl replied that it was nothing serious and began to further examine the emperor. He greeted all the guests and thanked them for kindly agreeing to be with him on such a significant day for him. All the guests raised their glasses to the empire, and then the celebration continued. The music started playing again and Philin unexpectedly invited Layla to dance with him. Although the girls didn't particularly like to dance, it had to be done in order to show others that everything was fine with them. Like Layla, she didn't try but nothing worked for her. Her movements were awkward and she felt very tense. The groom laughed at her awkwardness. He admitted that he had previously guessed that she had no talent for dancing, but now he was finally convinced of it. Then he even complimented her on her beautiful dress and jewelry. It looks like you have properly prepared for your debut? Layla felt funny. He didn't even realize that it was a completely different dress, and he seemed to have forgotten that they were supposed to have silver-colored matching outfits. Or maybe he just didn't care so much that he just didn't even remember about it. What's happened? Did I say something wrong? The guy asked her, noticing her thoughtfulness again. The girl did not have time to answer, when suddenly Duke Tenwon approached and distracted her fiancé with conversation. She immediately stepped aside. Layla thought that if he had not been distracted, she might not have been able to restrain herself and flared up in front of everyone. The girl wanted to find a place here where she could be alone, but the next moment she was called by Countess Marisa, who really wanted to chat with her. Soon other society ladies joined them, who immediately began to talk about the elegance of Layla and her outfit. Then they began to wonder when she and the Duke would finally get married. Does it matter? After all, the Duke already has an heir. Suddenly the lady who quietly approached them said in a sarcastic tone. Layla recognized her immediately. It was Countess Byzantine, Sophia Byzantin. Before her marriage, her last name was Hadlin, daughter of the Duke of Hadlin, who together with Layla claimed to be Philin's bride. At that time everyone thought that the late Duke and Duchess would choose her, and of course she herself was convinced of this. Having learned that the choice fell on Layla, the daughter of a provincial count, Sophia took out all her anger on her. Then no one knew that she hit Layla. And all because Count Tabisa and his wife preferred the money that Duke Hadlin offered in exchange for their silence. Although Layla heard that after that she got married and became Countess Byzantine, but she did not think that she would meet her again in such a place. What's wrong with you? Is it true that your fiancé will have a child? I heard he really cares about that woman, the girl asked Layla mockingly. Then she also remembered that that woman was also a princess. Therefore, her origin was clearly better than that of Lady Tabisa. Layla looked at this girl and understood that she was being ironic when she said that she was not the native daughter of Count and Countess Tabisa. But judging by the way everyone was looking in her direction, there was no one who didn't know about it. Sophia looked at the expression on Layla's face and laughed. She was glad that her words hit the target. But suddenly, Layla smiled back at her and reminded her that the princess of a fallen kingdom could never become a suitable match for a man of the empire. I will soon become a duchess, but you will remain for the rest of your life just a countess, Layla said at the end in a confident tone. Then the girl told all the ladies that she would like to rest a little alone and said goodbye. She finally managed to find a place where she could be alone. Layla stood on the great terrace and thought. The girl understood that if Sophia could say such things to her face, then everyone else was discussing her life behind her back without any embarrassment. Layla felt at that moment that she was very tired. She'd rather spend her days sorting through paperwork than being here. And quietly under her breath, one whispered that she wanted the estate back. Hail to the son of the empire! The girl greeted him politely and bowed. The emperor smiled back and was surprised at such a distant greeting. He admitted that this is why he did not want to reveal his identity. Now she knew everything, and the guy suggested skipping all the formalities. He asked what she was doing here all alone. I just went out to get some fresh air, Layla answered modestly. She still felt a little awkward next to him. He again noticed that my manner of speaking sounded a little distant. The emperor took her hand and asked her not to be like that. Sit down, please, he told her and quickly sat her down on the ottoman. The girl immediately said that she felt awkward sitting in front of him. but in response he only laughed at her official tone and suggested that she was not entirely comfortable standing in her shoes. "So, how did you like the banquet?" the emperor asked Layla. The girl had just begun to tell her that she liked everything and was having fun, when the emperor cut her off mid-sentence. He knew perfectly well that she was lying. Just recently her face was full of melancholy. The guy admitted that he doesn't really like it here either. He doesn't like it so much that he would rather deal with paperwork than attend such events. Layla was very surprised. Their thoughts were very similar. It was strange that a person who is the ruler of an empire actually hated banquets. Even after learning his true identity, they still got along well. And Layla really liked it. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Suddenly the emperor interrupted her thoughts. He noticed her thoughtfulness and gaze. The girl shuddered and asked for forgiveness. She herself didn't notice how she was carried away by her thoughts, not noticing what was happening around her. "Instead of asking for forgiveness, it's better to tell me why you were looking at me like that." Layla was very embarrassed and immediately turned away. She didn't know what to answer him. "Is there something on my face? Or is it because I'm not very handsome today?" He began to ask her questions in a completely serious tone. Layla was very amused by the way he asked something like that with such a serious look. The girl laughed loudly in response to his question, which greatly puzzled the emperor. "I ask you to forgive me for my tactlessness." Noticing his reaction to laughter, the girl immediately tensed. But the emperor replied that he was not looking at her like that because of that. He admitted that he was just glad to see her smile. "You're teasing me again." Layla was embarrassed. Her face was covered with a shy blush. The emperor replied that he was telling the truth, and I didn't understand why she continued to perceive all this as a joke. He reminded her that he always tells the truth to those he likes. "So you like me? But why?" Layla asked him, still thinking that he was joking with her. The emperor replied that he had his own reason. In addition, he really enjoys finding and processing uncut stones. "Your Highness, it's time for you to go." Suddenly the emperor was called and he nodded in response. Layla realized that he was leaving, and decided that she needed to say goodbye to him as it should be. She immediately jumped to her feet, but lost her balance due to her uncomfortable shoes. The next moment she fell straight into the emperor's arms. Layla was very scared and asked for forgiveness for causing him inconvenience, but he just smiled back and asked her to stop apologizing and better thank him. The emperor, smiling, left the terrace, leaving her alone. The girl was terribly angry with herself and did not understand what was happening to her. She was even scared to imagine what would happen if someone saw this. Suddenly the door to the terrace opened sharply, and Philin entered with a very serious expression on his face. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders and started screaming, "Layla, are you cheating on me?" The girl stood with her eyes wide open. Because of his sudden appearance, she was very confused and could not answer anything. He continued to hold her shoulders tightly and yell at her that she had completely lost her shame. Also in such a place. "What are you talking about? Stop talking nonsense." Layla slapped his hands and responded indignantly. The girl's groom replied that he saw everything with his own eyes. It was stupid to deny that she had sex with the emperor. "I didn't make out at all. He just helped me," the girl explained with annoyance. But the Duke did not want to believe a single word she said. He saw her smiling sweetly next to him. "You've just never smiled at me like that." Layla explained that she could not make a dissatisfied face in the presence of the emperor. And besides, she has no reason to smile like that around him after what he did. "What did I do wrong?" The guy was sincerely surprised. Then he realized from her expression that she was talking about Cecilia. Philin reminded that he only cares about this woman because she is carrying his child. As soon as he is born, he will immediately kick her out of the estate. Layla listened to him, and all this did not fit into her head. She didn't understand why she should believe him. Frowning, the girl offered to prove her words with actions. He did not pay her a single bit of attention and did everything for the sake of that woman. "So how should I trust you?" The Duke explained that the woman was completely alone and had no one to help her. And besides, Layla is coping quite well anyway. The girl was shocked. She couldn't believe that he didn't even understand how she felt when she had to go through all this alone. "Honestly, are you going to marry me? Or do you want to put this woman in the place of the Duchess?" Layla decided to find out everything once and for all right now. The Duke tried to explain that this was impossible. Yes, she herself must understand this, that only she can become his wife. But Layla was unshakable. She didn't believe a single word he said. If you are telling the truth, then prove it. At that moment, she wanted to say that, for example, she could kick this woman out right now. But at the same time, she understood that this was very immature and cruel of her. In addition, this woman carries his child under her heart. Do you want me to earn your trust? Fine, suddenly the guy said. He grabbed her hand and forcefully pulled her off the terrace. The girl tried to reason with him and stop him, but he quickly walked across the hall past the guests, straight to the emperor. Your Highness, I came to ask your permission to marry Layla Tabessa. Suddenly, the guy said, standing right in front of the emperor and not letting go of the girl's hand. The emperor looked him straight in the eyes and with a smile on his face replied that this was impossible. The emperor looked at the duke's surprise and wondered in his thoughts. The duke seemed to really not understand the situation. How can you be so stupid? May I know the reason? Having recovered from the first shock, the duke asked. The emperor smiled in response and asked in turn. Ask because you really don't know, Duke Williot? The duke at that moment tried to suggest that his bride really had some kind of relationship with the emperor. But as soon as he opened his mouth and tried to talk about it, Layla immediately stopped him and turned to the emperor. Of course he knows, Your Majesty. The fact is that when some significant event occurs in the imperial family, the nobles do not have the right to hold events for 3 months. And this banquet was dedicated to the accession of the emperor to the throne. The duke cannot help but know about this tradition. Coming forward in front of the groom, the girl said to the emperor. She explained that her fiancé simply wanted his permission to get married this year. Layla tried to turn it into a joke. She explained that the duke really wanted to get married as soon as possible, and therefore was in a hurry to get His Majesty's permission. All the guests around who were watching this scene immediately began to whisper. They now had no doubt that the duke loved his bride very much. Although their relationship began to be questioned because of another woman, it now became clear to everyone that the duke's legal wife and mistress were on completely different levels. The emperor heard perfectly everything that his guests were saying. He was amazed that Layla not only defended her fiancé's honor admirably, but also made everyone think of them in a good light. The emperor replied that everything was clear to him now. However, he is a little selfish, so he suggested returning to this issue in a month. You can wait, Duke? Philin, of course, agreed. He was very glad that everything ended so favorably for him. Then he said goodbye and, together with his bride, left the emperor. The emperor followed Layla with his eyes and thought of only one thing. I will get you no matter what. It will be an irreparable loss to let you spend your whole life with such a fool. He decided that he needed to hurry his assistant Bear and conduct the civil servant exam as soon as possible. Layla rode back to the estate with the duke in the carriage. She looked at her fiancé with contempt and did not understand since when he had been behaving this way. The duke broke the silence and asked her why she did not warn him about this tradition in advance. Did you want to see me disgrace myself in front of His Majesty? Layla couldn't believe it. Now he was making her guilty too. She was very upset that she had to sit and listen to all this, and all only because she is not a duchess, but just the useless daughter of a count. The carriage stopped at the estate. His mistress was already waiting for the duke here. He immediately started smiling when he saw her and ran into her arms. Layla silently watched everything that was happening from the carriage. Not so long ago, he said that he would kick her out of the estate, although he loves her so much. Now it was visible to the naked eye. After what she saw, Layla quickly turned away so as not to see them. Now she wasn't sure that everything would be okay. After some time, Layla was working on papers in her office. Her maid asked her to at least have lunch. After the duke left, she worked all the time and didn't even have time to eat. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A moment later, the door opened and Cecilia walked into the office. Layla was very surprised. This was the first time this woman came to her in person. Have you been well, lady? Asked the pregnant girl. But Layla replied that she was a little busy right now and asked to get down to business right away. Cecilia promised that it would not take much time and sat down on the sofa. She explained that the duke had told her about leaving next week. I would like you to do something for me. And then the girl explained that she would like to ask to buy some clothes and toys for her unborn child. Layla looked at her with such a look that the girl fell silent and asked why she was looking at her like that. Cecilia reminded that she would soon become a stepmother. We are not in the kingdom, so there are no maids here to take care of this. So I ask you, since you are of the same status with them. Layla smiled silently back at her. This woman dares to treat her like a servant. It was obvious to the girl what this woman was trying to achieve, and it was funny. Quite a pretense. Go away. Layla answered her with a serious tone after a short pause. She then asked him to stop calling her lady. From now on, address me appropriately. Your kingdom has fallen and the Heliod family name no longer exists. After these words, the pregnant girl jumped up and shouted that this does not change anything, and she still remains a princess. You were a princess, Miss Cecilia. Now you are an ordinary commoner. Layla answered her in a calm voice, and then she added that, nevertheless, one treats her with respect, and only because she is carrying her fiancé's child. Layla promised to continue to treat her well until she gives birth and leaves the mansion. Then she asked the pregnant girl not to make noise over trifles. Will I leave the mansion? Cecilia asked in surprise. Layla calmly confirmed and revealed that Philin plans to kick her out as soon as she gives birth to an heir. Layla paid attention to the girl's reaction after her words. It was clear from everything that she really knew nothing. She calmly walked to the front door and opened it, hinting for the girl to leave. In parting, she said that she could not promise to be a good mother to her child, but she certainly did not plan to mock him either. As soon as Cecilia left, Layla immediately felt that she urgently needed to rest. She ordered the sofa to be cleaned, while she moved with the documents to another room. But even after changing rooms, she couldn't concentrate on her business. The girl decided to lie down for a while. Just a little, because there was still a lot of work ahead. Layla dozed off right while sitting on the sofa next to a whole bunch of papers. The sun was already setting and the room was in twilight, when a sharp knock on the door opening woke her up. The frightened girl opened her eyes and saw her fiancé, the Duke, in front of her, who had a very angry expression on his face. Why did you do that? He asked her from the threshold. Layla immediately realized that most likely something had happened to Cicely again. The groom asked why she was rude to her. Well, Layla explained that this woman is no longer a princess, but behaves inappropriately towards her. Layla just notified her that after the birth of the child she would leave the mansion. Philin responded by shouting that it was not necessary to say such harsh words to a girl who had lost her country. And besides, he should have said this, and not she. Layla replied that she just did something so that he would not dare to do it. Therefore, she, as his fiancé, took the initiative into her own hands. Right! You are the bride, but not the duchess, the guy shouted to her. Even though she lived here for more than 10 years, she still didn't understand something. She's still not a duchess. So don't even think about interfering in the affairs of the duchy. After these words, the girl immediately remembered those who took care of her, as if they were her own daughter. It was for their sake that she tried all this time. All this time she worked for the benefit of the Williot family, and now she must endure humiliation from her fiancé because of some woman. Is everything clear to you? The groom asked the girl standing over her. But now everything really became clear to her. It couldn't go on like this any longer, and she knew it. Yes, I'm over it, she answered her fiancé and abruptly stood up from the sofa. Then she took out a chest with a family seal and placed it on the table in front of him. At this moment, she asked forgiveness in her thoughts from the Duke and Duchess who were taking care of her. But she couldn't do this anymore. After that, she told him that from now on the affairs of the Williot family did not concern her. The guy tried to be indignant and said that in this way she only shows her irresponsibility. Watch your language, Philin, she answered him sharply. Then she reminded him that he should have been the one doing all this work from the start. But he continued to ignore all this, so she had to do everything for him. The duties of a housewife are not my concern either. I'm just the daughter of a provincial count, so from now on take care of your own affairs. As the bride left, the guy still tried to impertinently that if in this way she wanted to force him to apologize, then it was in vain. The girl threw the papers at him and replied that they had nothing more to talk about. Moreover, she is tired and really wants to rest. Leaving the office, a maid immediately approached Layla, carrying letters from her assistants. But the girl immediately stopped her and said that from now on, everything related to work should be taken to his lordship. After some time, the young Duke was sitting at a huge table which was all littered with work papers. He grabbed one piece of paper after another, trying to figure out what to start with. More than an hour passed like this. The young Duke was indignant that she spent as much money preparing for the rainy season as paying rent for the land. He saw no point in spending so much money on some kind of rain. Therefore, I decided to radically cut down on expenses, unlike stupid Layla. Of course, there was one moment when he doubted and even wanted to consult with her. but he immediately drove the thought away. He had to handle this without her knowing. Moreover, then she will no longer be able to look down on him. He also needed to check the budget without Layla's participation. Moreover, he did not know how to find out that there were no problems. Then he remembered that the library might have the information he needed. The guy called the butler and ordered him to bring him the key to the library. He then began to quickly get ready to go there. Suddenly, Cecilia jumped on him from behind and started tickling him. She saw that he was busy with business, but explained that she really wanted to be near him because of the situation with Lady Tabisa. "It's okay, stay." The guy answered her, smiling and hugging her tenderly. Then he added that he always has time for her and he can do all the things later. When the butler brought the key to the library, he ordered to leave it here and leave. At this point, Cecilia turned her attention to the papers that talked about preparation for the rainy season and responsibility for risk. Is he going to invite a magician during the rainy season? The girl thought quietly while looking through her work papers. When the butler left, the girl told the guy that she had a small request, but before he listens to her, he must promise that he will do everything she asks him to do. The guy was wary, but she immediately saw this and explained that it was a child. Early in the morning, Layla was sitting in her room and didn't know what to do after leaving work. Besides, she barely slept all night. Suddenly, she remembered that she had long wanted to read a book. It was a great idea, and she immediately went to the library. Near the library, she met the butler, who explained to her that the Duke had taken the only key at night and still had not returned it. Layla was very surprised that Philin was in the library and not on the training ground. It was quite unexpected. She still thought that he would slack off and not work on the documents. Since there was no spare key, the girl realized that she needed to take the only key from the groom. Of course, she understood that it would be quite difficult to meet with him immediately after she handed over all the work to him. Then she learned from the butler that the Duke was not yet in the library, but was still sleeping. That meant he was with Cicely. There was certainly nothing that could be done now, and it was easier to leave this idea. So the girl turned around and walked away from the library. Suddenly, the maid told the lady that the assistant really wanted to contact her on an important issue through the magic ball. Although Layla did not want to touch on any matters again, she still changed her mind. The Baron explained through the magic ball that he had contacted him regarding preparations for the rainy season. The girl explained that she could not help him in any way since now the Duke personally deals with all these matters. This news stunned the Baron a little. He began to beg the girl to check how far the Duke had progressed in this matter, because the preparations needed to be approved as soon as possible, and he expected to receive the documents within today. After this, the connection was immediately severed. Layla knew that it takes 2 days to restore a magic ball, even if it was only used for a short time, so she didn't even have time to object. The girl was very annoyed by this, but she could not ignore important things because of her own feelings. In addition, she decided that she would also take the key to the library. Knocking on the room, Layla immediately saw that Cecilia opened the door. The girl noticed a necklace on her neck. It seemed strange to her that she wore it even while sleeping. When Layla asked where the Duke was, the pregnant girl replied that he was still sleeping after a rather exhausting night. From her tone, Layla immediately noticed that now she was not even pretending to be polite in front of her. The girl asked him to tell the Duke that she had come and had important business with him. But just at that moment, the door opened wider and the young Duke came out. "What is it, Lady Tabisa?" At this moment in the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's assistant was wondering why he could not take his eyes off some handkerchief. "It's a beautiful scarf, isn't it?" Smiling and showing a handkerchief, the Emperor asked his assistant. But the guy did not crush such delight and did not see anything special in the scarf. The Emperor then asked how preparations for the examination were going. The assistant immediately gave him the questions that he had prepared and asked him to check if they were too difficult. After skimming his eyes, the Emperor immediately tore them up and asked him to come up with more complex questions. He explained that he didn't want idiots as his assistants. The guy was indignant and even expressed doubts that the Emperor really wanted to find himself another assistant. But the Emperor replied that he had no doubt about it. Moreover, he already had one person in mind. But the Emperor will decide whether to choose him or not only after receiving the exam results. "What business did you come to my chambers for?" the Duke asked his bride in a cold tone. He assumed that she had come to him to apologize for her behavior last night. But Layla just smiled back and replied that she wasn't sure she had anything to apologize for. She explained that the Baron contacted her because he did not know that she had transferred all matters to her fiancé. The rainy season is coming soon, so he asked for the approved documents to be sent to him. Philin replied in an arrogant tone that he had already checked and approved everything. In addition, he said that he had found some problem in them, which he had also already solved. But he was not going to reveal all the details to her, since it was no longer her concern and her little help was no longer needed. Layla was very offended by his words about her insignificant help. She just stood and watched as the groom, tenderly hugging his mistress, disappeared behind the door of his chambers. She didn't even have time to ask about the library key, and she learned from the butler that the Duke had already personally sent all the documents, so there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, Layla noticed the invitation letter. She immediately recognized the pattern on it. It was from Byzantine County. Layla immediately remembered Sophia. The girl immediately realized that she wanted to take revenge on her for what happened at the Emperor's banquet. Without thinking twice, she immediately tore it apart. "Madam, did you hear?" The maid asked her and told her that His Majesty the Emperor was looking for a new assistant. An official document has already even been published, and most importantly, it says in large letters that women are also allowed. This news made Layla think. The participation of women has not been prohibited before, but this is the first time this has been stated so directly. At that moment, she remembered their conversation when the Emperor asked her if she would take the opportunity to become a civil servant, if such a chance presented itself. Layla even had the idea that it was all because of her. "Sarah, find out as much as you can about this document," she asked her maid after some thought. There was about a month left before the exam. It included 7 disciplines: management, taxation, politics, property, and others. Although there were more disciplines than Layla expected, it was not surprising. Being close to the Emperor is a very important position. Therefore, a competent person must act as an assistant. Layla understood that this was a great responsibility. It was impossible to act without thinking. "And yet I'm not going to give up," thought the girl, choosing the right book to prepare for the exam. "This book is better suited for studying politics, and not the one you hold in your hands." Suddenly, she heard behind her and someone's hand gave her a book. She turned around and saw the Emperor in front of her. Before I even had time to greet him, he made a sign not to show who he really was, and he asked not to formally address him in public. The girl thanked him for his advice, but replied that she had already read this book, which he recommended to her. The Emperor thought a little and pointed her to another book, but the girl replied that she had already read that too. Then he showed her one book after another, but in response he received the same thing. She had already read every book he suggested. "My God, I don't think you need to study politics anymore," he said, smiling to the girl, and added that now he would have to make the exam even more difficult. "By the way, if you have some time, could you help me? There is something that needs your help." The Emperor said that he needed help and asked to follow him, which the girl obediently did. She looked around and didn't understand what he might need in such a place. They stopped at one counter and she suddenly heard the merchant praising his seeds, which are not afraid of rain, and because of this they grow even better. He convinced the guy that they were exactly what he needed during the rainy season. "If you plant these seeds, you will not have to worry about the future harvest." Layla looked at his hand and immediately recognized the seeds he was holding. "Don't buy them, Mr. Cal," she told the Emperor, intervening in the conversation with the merchant. The girl explained that the merchant was lying. She explained that these were the seeds of quilt, which was mainly grown and eaten by nomads in the eastern desert. Therefore, the words that these seeds will not be harmed by the rainy season are a blatant lie. After such an explanation, the merchant began to make excuses that this was his first time selling seeds, so he could not explain everything properly. A moment later, he grabbed all his goods and quickly ran away. The Emperor laughed, but in fact, Layla never ceased to amaze him. He was amazed that she knew so much about crops. Then he took out a wallet from his pocket and gave it to Layla. "I think the lady will find a much better use for them than I can." And then they moved on. The guy said that he definitely needed to find one plant, and he was very glad that he asked Layla for help. "Could you help me find this plant?" After these words, the girl immediately remembered her fiancé. Unlike Philin, this man told her that he needed her. She had even forgotten how nice it was to be able to help someone. And of course, without hesitation, Layla agreed. "Then let's go." The Emperor extended his hand to her and they went further in search of the plant he was looking for. The guy walked and thought that in fact they didn't have to hold hands. Well, is it normal for a lady to follow a stranger man without a drop of fear? He mentally asked himself a question. Of course, he knew that she could protect herself, but she could have been attacked by someone who was also not susceptible to poison like him. There were probably a lot of people around who were just waiting for such a lady to lose her vigilance. The emperor was sure of this and held her hand tightly. She followed him like a naive kitten. Crap! Whatever one may say, she is too gullible, he thought. After that, he stopped abruptly and asked the surprised girl why she was following him without the slightest doubt. Aren't we going to Green Street? Layla asked him with surprise and misunderstanding. She explained to him that she immediately understood where they were going, because she agreed to help him find the right plant. Would you say that if I wanted to use him for bad purposes? For example, to kill someone? The emperor suddenly asked her. But to his surprise, the girl replied that most likely he had his own reasons for this and she could not blame him. The guy was amazed. He couldn't believe she trusted him so much. But when they first met, she was very careful. But now her look was completely different. This look spoke without words. I believe you. Layla said that she first learned about quilt about 5 years ago, when a crop failure hit the empire. She was worried because since last year the amount of precipitation began to decrease, and a terrible drought was expected. Although they were able to survive that year thanks to the grain they had prepared in advance. But after that incident, they had to read all available books to find a solution. And then she found these seeds that grow well even in the desert. Layla admitted that although she agreed to help him, she was a little doubtful how useful her superficial knowledge would be. The emperor replied that he had heard very little, but even this was enough to understand how well she really understood this. You provide me with great support just by accompanying me, he added at the end. His words greatly embarrassed Layla. He said this as if nothing had happened, and it always took her by surprise. Suddenly the girl stopped. She came across a stone that seemed very familiar to her, but she could not remember where she had already seen it. Did you like anything? The emperor suddenly asked, leaning close to her. Layla didn't even have time to answer when the guy turned to the merchant with a request to look at this necklace. The merchant immediately approved of their choice. He said that this magical necklace was made from a single energy stone. This is a very rare item that is difficult to get. Through the gemstone it is naturally filled with magical power. And what is his strength? The emperor asked with interest. The merchant replied that it would be better if he showed them in person. There was silence and nothing happened. Look here, the merchant suddenly said and pointed to his huge muscular arm, which just a moment ago was ordinary. He explained that this necklace can change body parts at will. This did not surprise the emperor at all, and he replied that it was a useless toy, which greatly upset the merchant. Do you want this necklace? He offered it to the girl, but she replied that it was not worth it and they needed to continue searching. Leaving, Layla looked at this necklace again. And yet it seemed very familiar to her, although she could not remember where she had seen it before. You found what you were looking for? The girl asked the emperor, who replied that most likely they had already examined everything here. And he suggested stopping the search for today. Going out into the street, the guy thanked Layla for spending so much time with him. He promised to remember today and repay her next time. And further, here. It is unclear where he took out a small case in which lay the very necklace that they had recently examined at the merchant. Layla was amazed. She didn't understand when he managed to buy it, and more importantly, why gives it to her. This is a gift for the help you provided, he explained to her. The girl didn't understand because she didn't do anything like that. But the emperor did not want to hear anything, and said that he was ordering her to take this gift. Thank you. She modestly thanked him, realizing that she had no other choice but to take this necklace. Suddenly his bodyguard turned to the emperor and said that it was time for them to leave. Then see you next time, lady. Smiling, he said to Layla and left, leaving the girl alone with a gift in her hands. A little later, she sat with her maid in the carriage and apologized to her for not being able to show her the capital. The maid replied that she should not worry about this. She had already seen enough today. In addition, she admitted that she noticed that that young gentleman had a higher status than the madam. It was His Majesty the Emperor, Layla answered her in a serious voice. At first the maid smiled and thought that the mistress was joking. But then I realized that this was not a joke. She jumped up excitedly. And she began to fearfully say that this is the same emperor who is called the Bloody One. Layla replied that she should watch her tongue. After all, if she says something wrong, she may be accused of insulting the imperial family. Bloody emperor. He killed all his humble relatives, including his father. It is not surprising that after his accession to the throne he became notorious. When they met, the emperor did not seem like such a person. But Layla understood that she did not know the whole truth. With such thoughts, Layla drove home, tightly holding the emperor's gift in her hands. When Layla drove up to the house and got out of the carriage, she saw servants bustling around near the entrance with a huge amount of someone's purchases. "These are things bought for the young lady," the butler explained to the girl. "I really didn't like that this woman was treated the same way as she was. Even the servants were already calling her young lady." Layla couldn't understand why this woman bought so many things. Of course she knew that she needed several dresses, since she had nothing to wear. But at the same time, due to her position, she still won't be able to wear tight clothes. "I would like to see the receipt." The girl turned to the butler, who immediately provided it to her. Layla was amazed. 17 dresses, 19 pairs of shoes, and a bunch of jewelry. This woman spent 6 months' expenses on managing the land in one go. Lena thought that her fiancé's mistress had gone crazy. In addition, after giving birth, she will no longer be able to wear all these dresses. What is she thinking about? Layla tried to calm down. And we need to stop worrying about it. Now it was definitely not her concern. The maid at that moment asked where she should take the books bought by the lady. Before Layla could answer to take them to her chambers, Philin appeared. "What it is? What kind of books did you buy in such quantities unnecessarily?" He was indignant while studying the check. He recalled that they already have a huge number of books in the library. "You're not going to interfere in the affairs of the duchy again, lady?" he asked the bride in disbelief. Well, Layla replied that she didn't even intend to, and she needed the books because she was going to take the civil servant exam. The guy laughed in her face. He had heard that the most talented people from all over the empire were flocking to take this exam. He laughed at her self-confidence and was sure that she would not be able to pass this exam. "Here's my advice, don't waste your time." Smirking, he added at the end. Layla was initially upset by his words, but then replied that she would manage her time as she wished. The groom again urged her not to be stubborn, and suddenly he offered her a bet. If this happens and she can actually pass this exam, then he will fulfill her wish alone. But if you don't pass the exam, you'll have to apologize to Sicily for everything you've done. Sometime later, Layla sat over the books and studied them. The thought that if she failed, she would have to apologize to this woman haunted her. She understood that she must definitely pass this exam, but at the same time she had doubts about her success, and she even regretted that she had made this stupid bet. But then she realized that it was too late to regret anything. Moreover, she did not want to disappoint the person who gave her such an opportunity. Therefore, she pulled herself together, tuned in, and began to carefully prepare for the exam. There was not much time left, and we had to hurry. After some time, the maid did not come up and said that tomorrow they were returning to the estate. Therefore, she asked to warn her in advance about the amount of luggage. Layla replied that she was thinking about staying in the capital for a while, so she shouldn't worry about it. But the surprised maid explained to her that the young duke had already ordered 2 carriages to be prepared for departure. Layla immediately found her fiancé to find out from him personally about this. Philin explained that we need to go back as quickly as possible to check how preparations for the rainy season are going. Layla told him that there were only 3 weeks left before her civil servant exam, so she planned to stay here. Driving to and from the estate is just a waste of time. Moreover, she was very worried that she might get stuck there due to the rainy season. "Have you forgotten that we need to do a tour of the territory this week?" the groom reminded her. His question surprised her very much, walking around the area to understand the situation of residents before the rainy season. But she no longer had anything to do with the affairs of the duchy. The guy admitted that he himself was not eager to take her with him, but he understood that if he came to the barons without her, there might be rumors about discord between them. Be that as it may, this time he was right. Layla understood this perfectly. Such rumors will only undermine the prestige of the duchy, and her too. The duke stood up abruptly and said that he had no more time for idle chatter. He is already terribly busy, so he also needs to do the duchess's work. After these words, he looked at his bride, expecting at least some sympathy and an offer of help from her. "It must be hard for you, but try your best," the girl answered completely calmly, looking at him. The guy turned around with a dissatisfied look and left. A little later, the duke sat in front of a huge amount of documents. There was melancholy in his eyes. These paperwork tired him very much and didn't even think about ending. He tried to give the work to Duchess Layla, but she did not understand his hint, or simply pretended not to understand. "Phil, it must be very difficult for you?" Suddenly Cecilia appeared. She smiled at the guy and even offered to help him. He was very pleased to hear such a proposal from her, but he understood that she could do nothing to help him. Moreover, she is not even a citizen of the Empire. "You are so kind. I wish there was someone half as good as you," the Duke answered, smiling at her. But the girl grabbed the document despite his words and said, "I can help you with this." The next day it was time to head back together. Layla was giving her final instructions to her maid. She promised that she would return to the capital as soon as she finished inspecting the territory. Suddenly the girl saw her fiancé near the carriage in which she was supposed to ride. They got into the carriage together and hit the road. After some awkward silence, the Duke said that he had a conversation. Layla immediately understood that this was the reason why he went in the same carriage with her. The guy explained that this concerns preparations for their wedding. He immediately noticed how the bride's expression changed after his words, and assumed that she had already changed her mind about marrying him. Layla thought about it. She understood the need now to answer him that this was not so. But for a moment she even lost her breath. "No, it's just a little unexpected." The groom was very surprised by her answer. After all, during the banquet he said that he was going to marry her. He then proposed to get married in October on the territory of the duchy before the onset of winter. Layla immediately agreed with him, but she was very thoughtful. There is very little time left until October. And yet, she really wanted to quickly become a full-fledged duchess and find stability. She could no longer remain as a bride. "Then, as soon as we return to the estate, we will need to pick out a wedding dress and tailcoat," the girl said to her fiancé. He laughed in response and replied that the bride should not be preparing for the wedding. Layla knew this, but did not understand who else besides her could do this. Moreover, she did not want to ask her stepmother, Countess Tabisa, about this. "Cecilia can help you. By the way, she was the first to offer help," the Duke suddenly said. He then explained that being a princess, she understands such things better than anyone else, so she would be happy to help. "Why?" the girl shouted sharply at the groom. She was furious, and it was clear from her facial expression that she didn't really like the idea, to put it mildly. Not even a minute had passed before the Duke ordered the carriage to stop and jumped out of it almost on the move. Layla simply said after her in a calm voice, "Maybe in the kingdom of Mullis it's normal. When a mistress is engaged in preparations for the wedding, well, certainly not in the Cardan Empire." Layla imagined with horror how everyone would make fun of them if someone found out that their mistress was doing the preparations for the wedding. It would be much better to entrust this to Countess Tabisa. The evil Duke, gritting his teeth, quickly opened the door of the second carriage in which his mistress was riding, and silently sat down next to him, loudly slamming the door. "Looks like it didn't go well," the pregnant girl said, smiling at the scowling Duke. She realized that this plan was being carried out. But there was no time to hesitate. It was necessary to take urgent action. "I just had a thought. Maybe this woman is not ignorant at all, but is simply ignoring you?" Suddenly she said to the surprised guy. The Duke did not understand her words at first, but then, after thinking a little, he agreed with them. Now he was firmly convinced that he needed to restore discipline and remind him who was in charge. After some time, the carriages finally arrived at their destination. As if nothing had happened, the Duke and his mistress silently left and went straight to their chambers. "Lady, do you have a minute?" Suddenly, the alarmed Baron turned to Layla. He explained that he urgently needed to discuss something with her regarding preparations for the rainy season. Layla replied that this was no longer her responsibility, and that it would be better for him to discuss this with the Duke. He didn't argue, but just wanted to know and convey her opinion to them. "Baron, what were you going to tell Lady Tabisa?" suddenly said the Duke, who returned unnoticed. The Baron tried to explain to the owner what was going on, but the Duke cut him off mid-sentence. "Why are you asking her about this and not me? Are you looking down on me too?" Layla intervened in the conversation, seeing that the situation was heating up. She explained that the Baron only wanted to ask her for advice. Ask for advice? From someone who has only worked for a few years? The Duke was surprised. He then warned the Baron and ordered him not to tell her anything more about the affairs of the duchy. A few days later, the girl went with her fiancé to explore the area before the rainy season. Layla was ultimately unable to speak to the Baron. But even if there were rumors about their separation, she felt much better now. The Duke carried out the inspection responsibly, carefully listening to the wishes of the residents. Layla was worried that he was too stupid for something like that, but he turned out to be much more attentive to his lands than she expected. And this calmed her down a little. Suddenly someone grabbed her by the dress, and turning around she saw a little boy. She sat closer to him and he said that he wanted to tell her something, but suddenly her fiancé appeared behind the boy. Layla, smiling, explained to the boy that she was not the owner of these lands and he could turn to the owner. "No, it's you. After all, it was you who took care of us all this time." Suddenly the surprised boy said. At the same moment his mother grabbed him and asked for forgiveness. She explained that he was still too small, so he did not understand what he was saying. The Duke, dissatisfied, immediately invited Layla to return back to the carriage and rest while he finished all his business. "I am the owner of these lands. I will take care of the rest." After some time, they were already riding in a carriage back to the estate. Suddenly, the Duke started talking about the wedding again. "As you said, Cecilia is not a very good candidate for the role of your assistant. Instead, I invited Countess Tabisa." Layla fell into a stupor, looking at his smug face. Now she began to guess that he had done this from the very beginning to put her in a difficult position. "It looks like I'll have to take 2 days off my exam preparation plan," she told the guy sadly. The Duke was very surprised to hear about the exam. For some reason, he thought that she had given up this idea a long time ago. Well, Layla answered him that she would never give up this opportunity. "But if you pass the civil servant exam, what will happen to the Duchess's job?" the Duke asked the bride with noticeable excitement. The girl answered without hesitation that she would fulfill all her duties both there and there, and she added to the groom's ridicule about this. "I simultaneously performed the duties of both the Duke and Duchess, so why do you think it's impossible?" But then the guy reminded her of something she most likely forgot. He recalled that her main task was to help him, do housework, and also give birth and raise children. He promised that he would never allow her to be careless about this, just because she filled her head with other things. Layla didn't answer. She remembered how the deceased Duchess told her the same thing, and then she considered it something natural. But now she didn't even know why, but she really wanted to object to him. A few days later, at the Duke's estate late in the evening, Layla flopped down on the sofa, exhausted. The maid praised her for having worked very hard these past days, and now the wedding preparations were almost complete. Layla was also pleased with herself. She planned to take up small matters after returning from the capital. The Countess had to take care of the rest. The girl's stepmother was already acting as if she had become the Duke's mother-in-law. She dragged the girl everywhere with her, telling her what to do. Layla was very annoyed that she interferes in everything possible. "Consider yourself someone important." Well, be that as it may, now at least I could concentrate on preparing for the exam. She has already spent 2 days, and there is no more time to waste. "Madam, do you like candy?" suddenly the maid asked. She explained that during the day she and the other maids had prepared candy in the kitchen and offered to try it. The girl happily put the candy in her mouth, and immediately felt the incredible taste of strawberries. She immediately remembered her meeting with the Emperor, when he treated her to candy with exactly the same taste. She remembered him saying that eating strawberry lollipops made him feel better. This strawberry candy was very similar. She felt warm and pleasant in her soul from these memories. It was already late and she had to go to bed, since tomorrow she still had a hard road to the capital ahead of her from early morning. The girl suddenly shuddered and woke up from a deafening clap of thunder. She jumped up from this sound and quickly ran to the window. Layla couldn't believe her eyes. It was raining outside the window and lightning was flashing. And that meant only one thing. The rainy season has already begun. Early in the morning, the girl went to the coachman, who explained to her that it was too dangerous to go today because of the rain. Layla looked at the dark sky covered with clouds and understood this very well. 9 years ago, the previous Duke and Duchess died when their carriage slipped on a wet road. Layla asked the guy when he thought it would be possible to use the carriage, but he definitely couldn't tell her anything. He only suggested that perhaps in 4 days. Layla immediately calculated that there would be 8 days left, not counting travel time. It was risky, but nothing could be done. All that was left to do was wait. After 3 days, the rain still did not stop. The girl understood that at this rate, tomorrow's departure would be in question again. She was nervous all day. She had a very bad feeling and a feeling that something bad was going to happen soon. Suddenly the door opened sharply and a servant ran in and shouted, "Mistress!" Trouble happened. Layla froze, unable to move. The memory of how she was informed about the death of the Duke and Duchess with exactly the same words surfaced in her memory. Layla immediately felt very bad and could barely stand on her feet. The maid who came running to help immediately noticed that the mistress was covered in cold sweat. A minute later, Layla came to her senses and the servant reported to her that the dam in the lower reaches of the river had broken due to heavy rain. "I need to see the Duke now," the girl said and walked out of the room with a decisive step. Already near the Duke's office, she met the Baron, who quickly told her about the damage that the disaster had caused. All the rice fields were flooded, and people were washed away by the river flow. Layla understood that it was necessary to urgently take action, even if people were injured. If this continues, the damage will become so enormous that it will be difficult to harvest the autumn harvest. At this time, the Duke's assistants told him about the complexity of the situation and asked him to take some measures as soon as possible. The guy, confused, tried to order that they urgently begin to repair the dam, when suddenly the door opened and he heard, "Do not talk nonsense." Layla and the Baron quickly entered the office. He tried to be indignant at her appearance here, but she didn't let him say a few words. The girl explained that it doesn't matter now. The main thing now is to avoid flood damage. "It's raining and repairing the dam will only increase the number of victims," the girl explained to her fiancé, pointing out the window. It was necessary to urgently evacuate people and wait until the rain subsided. The confused Duke objected to her that in this case, all the crops would perish. "Crops can be grown again, but the dead cannot be brought back to life," the girl shouted at him in a confident voice. Then she turned sharply to her assistants and ordered the guards to be immediately assembled to save people. She also ordered that all the carriages of the estate be withdrawn, so that the wounded and those unable to walk could be transferred to them. Then she ordered the maid to prepare a separate place for the victims in the annex and call all the doctors. She then turned to her fiancé and said that she would accept the punishment for violating the order later, and she will also take responsibility if any problems arise due to her self-will. And after these words, she quickly left the office, leaving the Duke in complete confusion. She gave all the orders so quickly that he did not have time to get in a word. After a very short time, the affected people were already safe. They were placed in a convenient annex and then had everything they needed. People talked among themselves and thanked Mrs. Layla, who had come to their aid so quickly. They did not hide their desire for her to quickly become an official duchess. At the same time, they wondered why the dam suddenly broke. After all, there were no problems with her before. But there was already a rumor between them that this year the preparations for the rainy season were being carried out by a gentleman who even forbade Lady Layla from interfering in the affairs of the duchy. Everyone knew that the Duke knew almost nothing about his own lands, and he should have just left it to the lady, who was very capable and never let them down. And in general, everyone admitted that before the return of Mr. from the war, everything was just wonderful, and something like this had never happened. The Duke was furious when he heard from his spy what the injured people on the estate were talking about. "How dare they look down on me?" At this time, Layla carefully studied all the documents and noticed that the budget allocated for the rainy season had been halved. She asked the Baron about this, who explained to her that these changes were made personally by the young Duke. He then showed her the new document that matched the reduced budget. He looked at the papers and Layla immediately understood what the problem was. The Duke refused to hire a wizard and replaced the stones in the dam with annam. "Doesn't the Duke know that there is a lot of quan in the water veins of these lands?" the girl asked the Baron. But he replied that he had warned the Duke, who did not even listen to him. Layla knew that even the previous Duke and Duchess did not know about this. She also came across this by accident while analyzing various documents about the drought. Knowing that Annam was vulnerable to quan, she decided to build a dam using door stone. It turned out to be quite expensive, but she calculated that it was better than being flooded. Layla understood. As a result, the cause of the damage was the budget cut several times. The girl firmly decided that she urgently needed to see the Duke. For the sake of the future of these lands, she had to try to talk to Philin. After some time, Layla came to her fiancé, who was working with a sword. "I came to talk about the problem associated with the seasonal rains." Although he didn't even look in her direction, she tried to explain that the problem was canceling the hiring of a wizard and replacing the stone in the dam with a stone of the wrong type. "It says here that the water veins of our lands contain quan," The girl barely had time to say anything when the angry Duke turned to her and asked, "Why do you call the lands ours?" He reminded her again that she was still not a duchess and it was all his. "This is my territory," he shouted and knocked the documents out of her hands. Then he started yelling again about how he asked her not to interfere in the Duke's affairs. "You just wanted to show off your abilities." Layla tried to explain to him that this was not true at all. Moreover, all these mistakes led to the death of people, but he didn't listen to a single word she said. The Duke accused the bride that she herself even spread these nasty rumors, which are now circulating everywhere among people. "I'm warning you for the last time. Don't you dare pry into the Duke's affairs," he said rudely to Layla. And then he warned that if she ignores him one more time and does whatever she wants, then he won't just leave it like that. Layla stood and thought. Suddenly a thought came to her. Be it more than just a warning. For me to answer, would he tell me that this was the last straw? A little later, Layla talked to her maid, who told her that because of what had happened, they began to compare her to the Duke. In addition, some people did not hide the fact that they wanted Layla to become the mistress of the lands. Layla realized that Philin thought that she had started the rumors. It looked like there wasn't a single drop of trust left between them now, but at the same time she didn't understand why he was in such a hurry with the wedding. Although it no longer mattered, the civil servant exam could be a good opportunity for her. Layla did not stop forgetting about this for a second. After some time the weather improved. The rain stopped and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. The girl came to the coachman in the hope that now she could definitely go to the capital for the exam. But suddenly the guy replied that all the carriages of the estate were used to rescue the victims, and the only one who was available just recently left. The Duke said that not being able to go out during the rainy season was bad for pregnant women, so the two of them rode on the remaining carriage. Layla was shocked. There were only 5 days left before the exam. Even if she leaves now, she is unlikely to make it in time. The girl was in despair. She didn't know what to do now. If things go like this, she will definitely not be able to pass the exam. After 5 days, the Emperor's assistant reported that at the moment, out of 200 applicants, 171 had come. The Emperor quickly scanned the list of applicants and noticed that Layla's name was not on it. Perhaps she was scared, the assistant suggested. But the Emperor knew for sure that this was not so. Besides, she didn't look like that kind of person at all. Time was up and it was time to start the exam. "I'll go too," suddenly the Emperor said and headed off with his assistant. Along the way, the guy tried to dissuade the Emperor from participating in the exams. He explained that in his presence, everyone would tremble with fear. "If their nerves are so weak, then they shouldn't become my assistant," the Emperor answered him. When they entered the room where all the applicants had gathered, the Emperor examined everyone present for a long time. Although he was waiting for this, there really were only men here. There was no law in the empire that would prohibit women from being civil servants, but since there were no such precedents before, it is quite natural that many could not accept the fact that women can also occupy management positions. Is that why she decided to give up? The guy thought while looking at the crowd of people. There was only 1 minute left before the exam. The applicants were asked to take their seats. The assistant had already asked permission to close the front door and begin the exam. The Emperor was upset. There was only 1 minute left and it looked like she wouldn't come after all, and he ordered the door to be closed. Wait! I'm also taking the exam to become an assistant to the Emperor." Suddenly, Layla screamed as I ran at the last moment into the almost closed door.